East Tennessee State is traveling to Kansas tonight. You'd think the game would be on TV. It isn't. Hi everybody, I'm Marky Bilson. Now, for the record, officially the game will be telecast by ESPN Plus. Now, this is a service online that you can watch the game on your computer, and you can watch all the 30 for 30 films and various other sporting events. You got to pay $5 a month for it. I think they give you a trial period of about a week or so, see if you like it, that sort of thing. But still, it's a cheap pay-per-view. That's what it amounts to. Now, this bothers me because it wasn't always this way. This isn't even the first time ETSU has ever traveled to Kansas. Back in 1992-93 season, ETSU was coming off of 4 straight NCAA tournament berths, and Jerry Pelfrey, Trezell Silvers, and Alan LaForce all went to the Allen Fieldhouse to take on the Kansas Jayhawks. And 27 years ago, ETSU fell behind 22-0, but they came back. And late in the second half, they had a lead before falling 86-83. I still remember seeing the scoreboard at Kansas, reading, Jayhawks win or Kansas win, and, making a big deal of it. And I said, you had a 22-0 lead, and you almost lost the game. Come on! What is this for celebration? Well, regardless, you don't have a, eke this one out sort of signage on your scoreboard, so there you are. Regardless, by the way, that year, Kansas went to the Final Four. ETSU played for the Southern Conference Championship against Chattanooga, but lost in the Southern Conference Final. Didn't get an NIT bid. And that was the beginning of the end, really, for the ETSU dynasty. I guess it was the end of the ETSU dynasty, although it wasn't a poor team, but it wasn't an NCAA team. And, in fact, the Buccaneers would not return to the big dance until 2003, when Ed DeChillis took them there behind Zakiwa Dude and Gerald Fields and those guys. All right, so that's the ETSU history lesson. One of the reasons I know this, the game was broadcast locally on TV. And back in those days, ETSU games generally were broadcast on free TV, on syndication. And I can even remember ETSU going on the road to take on, say, Oral Roberts, and the game was telecast. When ETSU played NC State in Johnson City, the game was telecast locally. Norm Sloan, speaking of NC State, used to do a lot of the color commentary for these basketball broadcasts that were generally shown on WJHL. But you'd preempt the Saturday night TV schedule or whatever to show East Tennessee State Buccaneers basketball. It was that era. Now it's ESPN Plus, and that means you got to spend $5 to watch the game. The bottom line is, this is a cheap offering, but it still is an offering of pay-per-view. Now, I know you get the 30 for 30s or whatever for ESPN Plus, but paying per view has significantly reduced the amount of attention that Major League Baseball receives now, where so much of watching baseball is not, game of the week anymore. There's very little over-the-air telecasts of Major League Baseball. Instead, it's done basically through cable packages. Not even so much with the Braves on TBS or the Cubs on WGN. That's not done anymore. And so the access to baseball has become more expensive, and as a result, it's fallen a bit off the map. 11 million fewer tickets sold this year than in 2007, according to the New York Times. The sport that's really hurt, I think, is boxing. After a while, at one time in this country, heavyweight title fights were akin to Super Bowls in terms of the amount of attention that they attracted. Now, blip on the radar screen, and I stand to say the reason why is because it got to be that you had to pay-per-view all the heavyweight championship fights. And in time, it just got to be $50 to see this. I think I'll read about it in the paper the next day. And reading about it in the paper the next day became not caring so much after all. And that's where boxing is now. They price themselves out of the market. You've got the idea that pro wrestling, same thing. We've got SummerSlam or WrestleMania. Well, it's all pay-per-view. And frankly, I don't think it's that big anymore. And, I don't think that we really get all that excited about pro wrestling anymore. Certainly not like we did in the 80s heyday and all this. Meanwhile, look at football. It's still primarily shown over the air, and I don't know how many people still have rabbit ears, but the idea is that, Sunday afternoon, you're going to be able to watch football on the tube, whether you pay for it or not. Same thing, college football. As a result, you can follow it, and follow it pretty heavily just by over-the-air networks. And I think that's a reason why the NFL is dwarfing other sports in popularity right now. As far as the basketball game, ETSU versus Kansas, Kansas comes in at 2-1. They lost a close game to Duke earlier on. They're ranked 4th in the country. ETSU is 3-0. They just won a 3-point game against Winthrop and are ranked 2nd in the mid-major poll. So, a chance for an Evansville versus Kentucky game? Possibly, but it should be said that ETSU is turning the ball over on 20% of their possessions, according to KenPom.com. That's got to change. And also, they're not shooting free throws very well, only 60%. The big matchup to watch, I think, is underneath the boards. Lucas Gesson for the ETSU Buccaneers, 7-footer. You knew that this year he was going to have to step up with the transfer of Mladen Armas to Boise State. And Gesson, a 7-footer, it'll be the first time that preseason Big 12 Player of the Year, Udaka Azubuike, will be having a 7-footer that he's got to fight underneath the boards with. And frankly, last year Gesson was mostly a part-time player. I say that he'd play about half and a half with Armas. He'd start his games, but he wasn't a guy that was going to give you 30-odd minutes in most games was Gesson. Now, that might be his role, and he's got it against one of the better players in college basketball. So how Gesson does against Azubuike may determine how far ETSU can go this season. The tip-off is 8 p.m. Johnson City time, Lawrence, Kansas time at 7. But you'll have to listen to it online if you want to follow it live, unless you want to pay the $5. And, ETSU really isn't going to grow, and the Southern Conference isn't going to grow if this is their TV deal. Because, as I said before, I can still remember when Oral Roberts' ETSU was shown on live TV, just over the air here in Johnson City, and now that isn't the case, unless ETSU is playing Tennessee. Remember, the Lady Vols came to town. That game was on free TV. If you remember 2016, when the Vols visited Freedom Hall, their first trip to Johnson City in 53 years, that game was on TV. But here's the problem. That might have been the Tennessee Volunteers were on TV, not necessarily ETSU. And I think that I'd be able to watch a Tennessee-Kansas game. This is something the Southern Conference and ETSU really need to get taken care of. I realize nobody in San Francisco will care about it, but they will in Johnson City, and the game needs to be shown free on local television in the future. Mission for the SoCon and ETSU if they really want to grow. Hi, I'm Mark E. Bilson.